Well, just to say, we're talking about Roberto and his vision. And you had asked this question of me of the currency of his vision. Interesting word. Is it still current? That's one word. And then also, is its coin? Does it have is it a legitimate currency exchange of value? And so I thought about that. And the first thought I had was that the vision is so radical that it's taken a very, very long time to be realized. And what I was saying just a while ago, which I'll say again, is when Roberto was young, he came up with this idea. He coined the word psychosynthesis as a medical student, and he was interested in psychosynthesis with a small p, which was this inherent natural process of the movement toward maturity, toward integration and synthesis, as he posited, guided by the higher self or the soul, and entailing the gradual healing, integration, synthesizing, and integration of the personality as a vehicle that could express the qualities and the energies of the higher self or the soul. I use the word term soul, but it's synonymous. So that, given that psychoanalysis and behaviorism were the two predominant modes at the time, was incredibly radical. And it's interesting that I came once to Tunbridge Wells to meet Michael Escott, who had known him at the Arcane School. And she was good friends with Nella, his wife. And Nella had told her that Roberto was incredibly lonely, that he couldn't find, as a young man, he couldn't find any resonance with his vision and other things that were going on in psychology. Jung came closest, but Jung was more academic and more archetypal, and he had the process of individuation, but psychosynthesis is much more practical in terms of how the process of psychosynthesis actually works. So he was lonely, and Nella, actually his wife, was worried about him because he would get tangled up in fringe spiritual groups, spiritualism and different things like that, because I think he was so desperate to find some corroboration and support. And that went on for a number of decades. I think in the 30s, sometimes he discovered the Arcane School, and there was his first resonance where they received him. In fact, they lionized him. They were so happy to have him come to Tunbridge Wells every summer in his smoking jacket. And then again, in the 60s, when Maslow wrote Toward a Psychology of Being and the human potential movement was happening, and the third force and fourth force psychology, transpersonal psychology, he felt a great resonance and was very excited about these other modalities that were kindred to how he understood psychosynthesis. But he was in his 80s by now. He was at the end of his life. So he had to bear decades of loneliness and stay true to a vision that was very, very radical for his time. And even in the 60s was radical. And even now, we have to keep remembering that really the most central idea and experience in psychosynthesis is that there is soul, that we are souls, and that we have personalities through which we express as souls. And that can get so easily lost in a pragmatic, fast-moving culture. It's still something we need to protect and speak about and live, I would say. So that's the first part of a radical vision. Then the other part is really what he saw in terms of the planet as a whole and human culture. And maybe I'll just read these two things. They're short. They're from the manual, and you almost missed them. They're in the introduction. But he says two things at the end of the first chapter. One is let us feel and obey the urge aroused by the great need of healing the serious ills which at present are affecting humanity. Let us realize the contribution we can make to the creation of a new civilization characterized by a harmonious integration and cooperation pervaded by the spirit of synthesis. So he has in mind that individual psychosynthesis can serve really the transformation and awakening of the species as a whole at a planetary level. And that's what he means by the new civilization. Then listen to this. We seem to sense that, this is about the process of psychosynthesis. We seem to sense that whether we conceive it as a divine being or cosmic energy, the spirit working upon and within all creation is shaping it into order, harmony, and beauty, uniting all things, parentheses, some willing, but the majority as yet blind and rebellious, with each other through links of love, achieving slowly and silently, but powerfully and irresistibly, the supreme synthesis. So way back there in 1910, or certainly when he wrote that in 1965, he had in mind what's foreground now is the disruption at the planetary level of our living systems. And the litany is long. You know, climate change is obviously there, but racial injustice, wealth inequality, you name it, healthcare, so forth and so on. So that we are facing now, in a sense, the second half of his vision. And what I was saying to you before is, I think that our generation learned what we needed to learn about the first part of the vision of really how to work responsibly with the soul in a grounded, behavioral, powerful, practical way. That learning can now be passed to the next generation, who, as you said, are younger and excited to help them take on what is the major issue of our life, their lives, is, are we going to survive as a functional civilization on this planet? Or are we going to, you know, there's all sorts of doomsday scenarios. My sense is that it will come through, but it's going to take an awful lot of change and fundamental transformation in how we choose to live, how we use our resources, how we treat each other, so forth and so on. And psychosynthesis, I think, for its second half life, the next 100 years, is beautifully equipped. And that's why I think that young people are flocking to it and are very interested in it, because they intuitively, just the way intuitively we, back in the 60s and 70s, recognize there's something here I need to know. I've been looking for it. And here's something, that moment when I looked at the egg diagram in the fall of 1970 and saw that diagram, said, this is what I've been looking for. And I don't know if I say this in the book or not, but I said, this is what I'm looking for, and I can make a living. I can raise a family. So it was a practical recognition as well as a spiritual one. And I think maybe I'm always tend to be the glass half full person, but I think that this younger generation, I'm very happy that I'm still alive, that I can work with them, that these people in Florida and there are other places too, that I can serve them in taking psychosynthesis into its second half life. And that will be, I think, as a planetary psychology, rooted in individual maturity and group maturity. I'm on a roll here now, so you have to stop.
Carry on.
Let me say one more thing, because the Holy Fire has just been translated and published in German. So Ulla sent me her introduction. Oh, there it is. Yeah. That she wrote in German to the German edition. And I got it translated on one of these apps, you know. Well, she talks about how that group in Germany took the Corona process and the group work level of how to work with the group soul and so forth that I had begun to teach. They have they have developed it, and their training is based on it, and they've done a tremendous amount of wonderful work on group psychosynthesis, and I won't go into the details. But anyway, so I mean, anyway, I'm so glad to be alive. Let's put it that way. To have this history, to know it, and at the same time to feel the vitality of the interest in psychosynthesis for this time. And it's different than what we were looking for 50 years ago. It's different. Yeah.
There's something about something you spoke to earlier, Tom, about being a similar age now to when you first met Assagioli.
Yeah.
And the second part is about the work that you've been doing yourself, Piero, Diana, Andrea, and many more have been doing, that has allowed this next evolution to take place, to be.
Yeah. Well, I think what I said before, I would say again, is that our job, so to speak, now looking back, and we didn't know that, we were just trying to get through the day. But I think our job was to take this expanded sense of the human psyche and learn how to work with that responsibly. And our first attempts led to some mistakes. And certainly the thing that happened in the San Francisco group is part of that, but there were those tendencies in other groups in Europe and in the United States too. It was an immaturity of understanding the nature of opening to the energies of the self. And we learned that. And we learned mistakes we could make. We learned how to work with that energy responsibly. We learned how to, the kind of work, the article I wrote, The Descent of the Higher Self, to look at the incarnational process as well as the transcendent process, that there had to be a balance, the balance between dark and light within the psyche, the emergence of trauma work as an important part, the emergence of body work. So many things had to be filled out from Roberto's vision, which was beautiful but undifferentiated. And I think our generation differentiated it and grounded it, brought the will forward, understood the relationship between the personal will and the spiritual will, and made, in a sense, gave psychosynthesis a practical, grounded base for behavior change without sacrificing the mystery and the beauty of the soul. That's a big order, because there are obviously behavioral therapies that don't pay any attention to the soul at all.
Yeah.
But to really affirm the power and mystery and guidance of the soul, at the same time find ways to make that very practical in everyday life. I think we, for better or worse, that was our job, and I think we've done it well enough so that the next generation can take it the next step. Was that what your question was about?
That's so much more than my question was about.
So, yeah, it's you can see I get excited about it, and it's wonderful to reach this age now where I could look at the sweep, and Piero and Diana, and I'm sure Andrea Bocconi, and we can join in that and talk about that. We'd have different visions, but so much wasn't when we were doing it was just getting through the day. It was so much hard work. We were committed and dedicated, but we were working very, very, very hard. I know that's true of Diana. I know that's true of Piero and other people in our generation. And so there's a little stepping back now and saying, look what happened and look what's happening now. Yeah.
There's something quite exciting that I see. So if I look at Petra's book and how she's brought together voices from across the globe, and I see you and I speaking same time in different continents.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. And the opportunity of coming together as four people, as you, Diana, Andrea, Piero Ferrucci, coming together to discuss and look at things going forward. There seems to be a moment where people are coming together beyond differences. And that feels like a good ground to move forward. I think for some time psychosynthesis has been stuck in what was written, and now is a movement forward. And I think the way you framed it a bit earlier heralds that, really.
Yeah.
Supports that.
Absolutely. And I think another mistake that we made that led to lots of conflict between institutes and between versions of psychosynthesis, who's got the right version of psychosynthesis, and all these dynamics, they were painful and they slowed things down. And actually, given what happened in the United States, I saw a lot of my work from the 80s on here as bringing people back together again and beginning to say, listen, we have differences and we look at psychosynthesis in different ways, but we're all part of this large family. And the institutes I ran in Concord, up until the middle of the 90s, people came from Canada and all over the United States and from Europe too. So there was the beginning of what you're talking about. The other thing I wanted, because I wrote this down, I'm going to say it, at the last institute, this goes back to Roberto again, but Frank Heronian, who was one of Roberto's first generation psychologists in New York. Roberto came in 1957 or 58, and they founded the Psychosynthesis Research Foundation. And there were monthly seminars there where people would read papers, nothing experiential, read papers and discuss them. And Frank was part of that. Well, Frank came in 1994 as an old man. He died a few months later, to the last Summer Institute in Concord. And he was so happy to be there. It was a bit like me being happy, if I'm in a group of young people, doing psychosynthesis. He was an old man and we were all young. And he came and he wanted to film everything. He was filming everything. But he said a very interesting thing. He said, Roberto would be so happy. And we said, why? Why? I mean, nobody knows about psychosynthesis, and if they do know, they steal things from it. And we had instances of that, of other disciplines stealing without acknowledging all these usual, capitalistic things. And he said, no. He said, the major ideas are in the mainstream culture. It's just what Roberto would have wanted. And he didn't really care if it was called psychosynthesis. It was that these ideas. Now, to me, that's a symptom of the evolution of the ideas and of the culture, which we can count on. And
more and more as well, so the word soul isn't frightening anymore.
Right.
It's pretty everyday.
Pretty everyday. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a long haul. I think right now what I'm feeling talking to you is, well, two things. One, I can recognize more clearly what my job was, and it fit me perfectly in terms of who I was and what I was trying to do, and what our generation was called to do was to grow up in relationship to working with spiritual energies within a psychological context in a grounded and practical way. It's just what I said before about the mystery, but also the private. And then I just said, well, man, this is so exciting. I hear these young people who can take what we developed and take it further, take it into, as you said, real social change.
Yeah.
Real transformation of the institutions, the systems, the ways in which we live together on the planet. And going back to what you were just saying, I think a symptom of that is that people, and Zoom has done this and the pandemic has done it, people are coming together and they're not holding their cards close to their chest. they're saying, I mean, Piero and I did this thing in Sweden, you know, when it was last September. It was so joyous.
Yeah.
So joyous. Nobody was trying to outwit the other person or disprove the other person. We were trying to contribute to the growth of a community there in Sweden. And I think that the spirit of cooperation and integration, to use his words, is growing.
And it's that openness that is what I'm seeing, and it's different from 20 years ago when I started on this journey, and certainly from what you described 40 or 50 years ago. Yeah, you know, nobody having to be right. Something really quite non-dual, which I guess was part of the original vision anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all a function of maturity and growing, and it takes time. It takes time, and I just hope we have the time to do the rest.
Well, I guess it's a little bit like your book, Tom. You know, Holy Fire, allowing that spark to ignite, and I guess giving up, letting go of how that takes shape.
Right. Yeah, I think that is when I was thinking about Roberto, I made a list of various qualities that he had, but the one that came to me just about an hour ago, as I was sitting here, was faith. That I think that he had a very, very deep faith, not a religious faith, although there is such a thing as a religious faith, but he had a deep faith in human nature. That, and you know, when he says in this little adage, your soul knows all about it, is only waiting for you to find out. The implication there is that there is a deeper process that knows exactly what to do in each person, each group, each family, each nation, so forth. And that we have to be patient and to have faith in that and not try to make anything happen, but more listen very deeply and witness and work with what is happening at that moment and support that, whatever that next movement is in a person's life. And that's an act of faith because you don't know. You don't know. And yet we've seen again and again and again and again, if people can hold their life in that way, miracles happen. They find their way. They find their way in a way that's, he also says, for one person, one thing, for one person, quite the opposite. There's no, you know, one size fits all. There's no technique that you always can use. It's very, very idiographic and affirmative of the human being's capacity to find his or her way. So
faith.
Faith, yeah.
Well, that's a good 10 minutes. I guess we've had a bit longer. Tom, it's just lovely to speak with you, and you come back to speak with Diana, Piero and Andrea Bocconi.
Yes.
On the 24th. That's fantastic.
Good.